and welcome to another Unity tutorial. Today I'm going to go back through the process of getting a character from Mixamo and using the Mechanim system in Unity. So I have another tutorial which is the basics of Mechanim and Mixamo, but the issue is that about 15 minutes into it, there's this bad editing cut where I miss out a whole heap of steps, which is causing a bit of confusion. So I'm really sorry about that. I'm not sure how I can actually edit an existing YouTube video. So instead, I'm just going to create a new one and go back over these items step by step. So first of all, I'm in Mixamo, so mixamo.com. And I've logged in. Now you can also get free characters and free animations if you don't want to pay up front to begin with until you see what you can do with Mixamo. But if you're not an animator and you want to get really high quality characters and really high quality animations, then this is the place to go. It's a lot less messing around inside 3D modeling programs if you're not familiar with them. So we're going to go to the store here, and I always start by clicking on characters, and it'll give you a great big list of characters that you can pick from, and you'll find that some of them are free for you to use. So in the last tutorial I used a character called Remy, and he was free. I'm not sure where he is. Oh, here he is here. So this is Remy. Okay, now a character I love to use is Sporty Granny, and she's up here. So I'm going to use her, but it doesn't matter which character you use, you can still put the same animations on them because they're rigged all in the same way. So you'll have to excuse my internet connection because it's quite slow. So here's Sporty Granny. Now we can put animations onto her if we select the animations tab in Mixamo, and a whole bunch of them will come up. So if you wanted to put on like, these are just still poses. If you wanted to make Sporty Granny run, we can select the run animation and it will add it onto the character. And you'll see it come up in this window. And then if you select another animation, it will add that on, but it won't remember this running. What you need to do to actually embed the running animation into your character for downloading is to select this add to pack. Now there might be some cases where the animations will have the character actually moving. If we select this in place and turn it off, you'll see that she's now moving. Now the problem with this in a game engine is that you want to control your character with the arrow keys or with WASD or a control or whatever. So you need to be in control of where the character is in the environment. If you have an animation where the character is moving within the animation, then that causes all sorts of problems when you start to move them around using code. So the best thing to do is make sure that you set your animations to occur in place. So here's one here. I'm going to add that to the pack. Okay, now we want a jumping animation. So I want Granny to run along and then jump. So we'll go up here and type in jump into the search and see if we can find a jumping animation. Okay, so there's a whole lot of different jumping animations that you can see here. This one is a jumping on the spot. Now the problem if you're got a character that's running along and then going into a jump, if you select this jumping on the spot, the character will need to stop and then jump up, come down and then run off again. So it doesn't look like a very natural type of movement if you want to run along and jump. So something like this here is more appropriate, where she's actually running and jumping in a forward motion. So if we select that one to add to Granny, you can see that it's also moving the character. So we want to put an in place. And this will neatly merge with our running animation so that it will look a bit more seamless than having to stop. Okay, so we're going to add that to the pack as well. So we have a running and a jump. And finally, we're going to add an idle, because all characters basically stand around doing nothing for a while, and we'll need them to actually move when they're just standing still. Otherwise, you lose what's called in animation the breath of life from the character if they're not doing anything for a long time. Now let's just find a nice idle animation. There's a whole bunch of them to pick from. Happy idle. Okay, let's pick that one. Just sort of, yeah, okay, that'll do. Let's add that to the pack. Right, so we've got 3 animations that we're going to work with in Unity: running, happy, idle, and jump. The next step is to select your add to my assets and then go through the process of downloading. So when you get to this page for the Q download, when you select it, it will ask you for the download settings, and you need to select FBX for Unity here, and the rest you can leave as they are. And then queue the download, and this will take a little while to process and download. So I'm just going to download it and put it on the desktop of my computer, and I will come back into Unity and talk to you there. Now I'm back in Unity, and I've opened up a new 3D project, and I've already brought in the Sporty Granny folder that comes from Mixamo. Okay, so all I've done is put the Sporty Granny folder onto the desktop, so that's everything that comes from Mixamo, and drag it in and drop it in here, which I won't do again. But inside that folder, there's a whole heap of things. First of all, there's the Sporty Granny model, which is this one here with the little play button next to it. And then you've got these 3 blue cubes. Now, the name on them is too long to see in this preview here, but if you select them, you can see which ones they are here. This is the happy idle animation. This is the jump animation, and then this is the running in place. Okay, so I don't know why I got that error there. That's not related to Granny. So if we drag Granny into the scene, you can see here. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. Now I've got wireframe turned on. I'm just going to turn that off so we can see it a bit better. Right, now the camera is currently behind her, so that's not a very good view to see the animation. So I'll just select the camera and go Game Object, Align with View to change the view of Sporty Granny. Now if we run at this point, nothing's going to happen. Okay, so we've got the model in the scene, but there's no animations added onto it. There's also no physics in there at all, so she's not going to just fall out of the air. And if you have a look at the model of Sporty Granny over here, we can see that there's a transform, there's an animator, which I'll get to in a moment, and then there's a whole bunch of meshes, but there's no collider or rigid body on there, so of course it's not going to work in the physics system, which we don't want at this point because we're concentrating on the animations. Right, so what we're interested in now is to get these animations onto our model, and we do this with an animator controller, which is this bit here which says none at the moment. So we're going to create this new one, and we do that in the project. We go create, and you want to look for animator controller here, and you'll get a new one pop up. So the animator controller is this little square box with a few square things, a few lines, and a play icon in it. Let's rename this to Granny Animator. Okay, and then we want to apply that animator to our model. So select Sporty Granny, or whichever model you've got in the hierarchy, and find the animator that's attached. This will automatically be here. If it's not, you can add a new component and put the animator on there. Then take your new animation and drag and drop it into there. So now the animations are set to run on the Granny model, but there's no animations in there. So this is just a controller which is empty. If we double click on it, it will open it up in here. So this is the animator window, And this is where we put the animations and then set them to run and set them to trigger and all those types of things. So the first one we're going to do is grab hold of this happy idle and drag and drop it into the animator window. And what you'll see is that it goes orange. Orange means that it's the default animation, so it's going to run immediately. At this point, if we press play, you'll see that the happy idle animation is applied. Now, notice also in the animator that you get this little blue bar across the bottom of the animation that's playing. If I just turn off play, hit it again, just watch this bar as it progresses through the animation. What you'll notice is that it gets to the end and it stops. Now, more often than not, a game character that is standing around will be in its idle pose for quite a long time. So you want it to cycle through this so that the character doesn't just stop and freeze. So to do that, we select the idle animation itself that's back in the project down here, go across to the inspector, select the animations section, and then go down and under this timeline, find loop time, tick that, and tick the loop pose. That will make the animation cycle for as long as you need it to, and then hit apply. Okay, now if we come back and press play, we can watch it here that it will cycle through, and it just keeps cycling through. Alright, so that's the idle animation. Now if we grab hold of the jump animation and just bring that in, you'll notice that it's not orange, and that's because it's not the default and it won't play. If we want it to be the first thing that plays on our character, we right click and go set as layer default, and if we hit play, you'll see the jump animation run. Now it only runs once, it doesn't cycle. Usually when a character jumps, you want them to jump just once, and the jump will be controlled by, let's say, the space bar. So you don't want it to continue looping over and over again. You want them to jump and then go back to what they were doing before, such as running or standing in place. Okay, so we don't want that to be the default. So let's go back to the happy idle and set that to our default. Okay, let's at this time also bring in our running. So bring in our running. Now, the running you do want to loop, because as you're running along, it will play through the animation once, but your character might still actually be moving, so you want that to cycle. So just select it in the project and then go over to the inspector and make sure that you loop it as well by ticking these two boxes and then hitting apply. What we have in this animator window is called a state transition diagram, and we use them a lot in computer science to show the different states of the system and the ways that one state can transition into another. Now in this case it's being used for all the different animations. So it is used in other domains beyond computer science, but this is where I learned about it. So if we want to transition from idle to, say, jump, we can right click on the happy idle animation and make a transition. This then gives us this line that we can snap to one of these other animations. Okay, so let's just click on jump, and when this now plays, it will play the idle, it'll then transition and do a jump in place. So just watch what happens now with the granny. So he plays the idle and then it shoots down here and does jump in place. And then it stops because it's got nowhere else to go from here. If you wanted it to cycle back, you could right click, make transition, and then click back on the idle. So let's just run this and you'll see that it plays this one, it cycles down, plays that, comes back to here, plays that, and it cycles around. Okay, so that's how you do a transition. Now if we select this and just delete it, And we could also make a transition from jump down to running, and it will play this, this, and then this automatically. So let's just have a look. Idle, jump in place, running. Now remember, we put a loop on the running, so it's going to just loop around. It's not going to go anywhere else because there's nowhere for it to transition back to. Now, if you have a sequence of transitions that you want to run, then you would do it like this. You'd have them just automatically play this animation, then play that animation, then play that animation. The problem with that with your game is that you'll want to control the animations with code based on what the character is doing. So if the character is idle and then you press the space bar, you'll want the character to jump in place. That means we need to program what's going on with this actual transition. To do that, we're going to add what's called a trigger to cause this transition to run in order to trigger it. So to do that, we go up to the top corner where we've got parameters. This is in the animator view, and we add in a new one. So select the plus, and we're going to work with the trigger. Okay, so not with these ones here, which are used for more complex animation scenarios, but the trigger. So select the trigger, and then we need to give a trigger a name. So I'm going to call it is jumping. Now, whenever I create a trigger, I always use this sort of camel case where we've got a lowercase at the beginning and then a J, a capital J for the jumping part. So if it was is walking, it would be the W that's the capital. The spelling and the capitalization of this here is very important. It has to be exactly the same as the way that you've got it in your code. Now, there's a little button here that will show you whether your trigger is on or off. We want the trigger to be off because we want code to activate it. Right, so we've got an is jumping trigger. We then select the transition that we want to control with that. Over in the inspector, you can then add the condition. Now you can see it's already actually in here. If you don't have it, you can select the plus button and it will then give you the option of adding that. And because it's the only transition that we've got, sorry, the only trigger that we've got, let me just get rid of that, then it'll come up automatically for you. Now if we play at this point, because that trigger is on here, this transition cannot happen until the trigger is activated. Now to activate it, we need to do that with some code. So in the project, let's go create C# script, and let's call it Granny Controls. And then double click on it to open it up in your editor. Okay, just make this window a bit smaller, it's quite large. And the class will be called after the script name. I'm just going to replace all of this with my code so that you can see what's going on. Okay, so the first thing we need to do is we create this static variable at the top, which is an animator. I've got to call it anim. This will link back and grab hold of the animator controller that we've got attached to Granny. Now, to set up the animator to point to Granny's animator, in the start function when this first runs, we just do a get component of the animator to put it in here. Okay, once we've got hold of that animator, we can then use it to set the trigger. Now in this update function, you can see I've got this code here. If get button down is jump, now this will activate on your desktop machine for the space bar. So the space bar is an automatic jump button. And when the jump is activated, you'll see we're calling a set trigger is jumping. So it's going to set the trigger is jumping. Notice the spelling here, very important that this is the same, capitalization is the same in order for that to trigger. Right, so save that and go back to Unity, and we're going to add this code onto Granny. So I'm going to drag it over and drop it onto the Sporty Granny character, and we just select Sporty Granny and look in the inspector to see that it's there. All right, so now when we press the spacebar when it's running, it will activate this trigger here, which will cause jump in place to happen. There's no trigger or anything on this at the moment, so it will just go into a jump and then start running. So let's just test it. Press play, she's in idle, and she can be in idle for ages, and then press the spacebar. Okay, and you notice that it triggered down to here. Now, what you might not have known is that I pressed the space bar halfway through this idle animation. Now, I'm going to tell you when I press it this time, and you can see what happens. Okay, so I'm going to idle once. I'm going to press space bar now. And notice that this idle animation had to finish before it went down to jump, which is most annoying, because it creates this great big lag, which you don't want. When you press the space bar in a game, you want your character to jump immediately, not wait till it's finished playing this animation. So to fix that, we go to our transition, and over in the inspector, there is at the top a has exit time button. Untick it. That will cause this animation to be interrupted and go straight down to jump. Okay, so let's play that now. I'm going to idle through once and then jump now. Okay, so see, that worked immediately. Okay, now we don't want to jump and then go back to running in this instance, because we're only jumping from our idle state. So you'd imagine you'd be in idle, you jump, and then you want to go back to idle. So we can actually delete this transition. And after we've done a jump, we just want to automatically go back to there. So we can create a new transition and just go back. And it doesn't need any triggers on it. We just want it to run automatically. So let's play idle, 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 jump now. And that works. And it will continue to work with that code. Okay, so that is transitioning with the triggers. Now, if we want to go to run, so we're going to use our arrow keys or WASD keys to move our character around, then we're going to want to transition between idle and running. So I'll just move these around, which will require a little bit more code to be added onto our granny character. So go back into your granny controller code, and you'll see that I've already added the code that's going to move your character around. This code here is what I've added. Just highlight it for you. Now it uses the vertical and the horizontal axes, which are built into Unity, which will, in the case of a keyboard, translate to the arrow keys. And it will also automatically, if you've got a game console controller, it will automatically translate to that as well. So it's quite multifunctional, and if it's on a mobile device, then your little thumbstick controller will also control this code, which is really handy because you don't have to rewrite it. This code here is actually from the Unity's scripting website, which I always go in and grab to use it to move an object around, which will rotate and move forward and backwards. And all I do whenever I forget what this code is, if you type in get axis and you go to the manual for that, it will give you this little bit of code for driving an object around. So basically what it's doing, it's got a translation value, which is going to move the character forward and backs, and a rotation, which will rotate the object. When the character is translated in any direction, it translates it based on the z-axis of the character, as you can see here. So it's always pushing the character forward. Remember that the forward axis of the character is its z-axis. And the rotation will rotate the character. So it doesn't matter which way the character is facing, it's going to push it along z-axis, which has the effect of allowing you to turn and move the character forward and back. Now, along with this little bit of code, you've also got some variables for speed and rotation speed, which are up here as public floats. Speed is set to 10 and rotation speed set to 100. So you can change that based on how fast or slow you want your character to move. Right, so save that and just go back to here. press play. Now, if you're on the keyboard, you can use your arrow keys, and you'll see that the up and down arrow key is moving the character forward and back, and the side arrow keys are going to rotate your character, and then the up and down will move it in that particular direction. What you notice is that Granny is remaining idle. She probably will still jump. There you go. But you want, at this point, when she's moving forward or back, to be in a running animation. Now, unlike jumping, running is more of a you are running or you aren't running. So you've kind of got two states. And if you aren't running, you're idle. So instead of creating a trigger parameter, we're going to create a boolean. So if is running is true, then we want to be running. If is running is false, then we want to go back to idle. So we're going to add now a bool, and we'll call that is running. Okay, don't tick the box here. And then we're going to create the transitions between happy, idle, and running in place. So we're going to make a transition to running, and then we're going to make a transition that goes back as well. Now, from happy to idle, we're going to add in is running. And in the conditions, you'll notice now, because we've got a boolean value, we can set whether it's true or false. So if is running becomes true, then we're going to transition from idle to running. And back the other direction, we're going to transition from when is running becomes false. So it will go back the other way. Okay, so in the code, what that means is we have to test that when the character is moving forward or backwards, then we want the character to be in a running animation, which means we want to set the boolean value for our is running trigger. And we can do that in our update function. How do we know if the character is moving? This translation value here is the amount of movement forward and back that we're adding onto our character with this translate function. So if we test for if translation is 0 or not, we know that the character is moving. So I'm just put this code down here for us. And it's going to say if translation is not equal to 0, then we want to set running to true. Otherwise, running will become false. So we can control that particular, I'm going to call it a trigger, even though it's a boolean value, still triggering that animation on and off between the idle and the running states. Now, the other thing you want to do, save that and go back to here, is you want to make sure that you've interrupted the animations again. So if you select that and then select the other one and turn off this has exit time, and then we press play, you'll notice that she's now running, and when you stop, she stops running as well. Oh, if I come back, and the jump is still in there. Now the jump currently requires that you go back up to idle and then come down to the jump animation. So you may want to add a transition that goes between here and here as well to ensure that the character will jump as she's running rather than having to go back to idle and down to jump in place. To do this, we just create transitions between our running state and our jump state, and set the trigger here to our is jumping, which we've got, which the space bar is going to trigger. And then we come back with a make transition to running. But in order to ensure that we don't go back up to the happy idle from the running, we can put our boolean of is running here, is true, onto the transition back to jump. So if you're running along and you jump, you come back to running in place as well. So if we just now run this, if we jump in place, we'll come back to the idle. If we are running and jumping, which you can't see, but it does switch back here if you watch that really quickly. All right, so what we need to do is to now rotate our model around and put the camera and attach it to our character so we can see what's going on, because there's not really a lot of space to watch how she's reacting to this. So let's just go back to the scene, and I'm just going to rotate the model around like this. So let's say you want to follow your character from about, let's say there. Grab your camera. Once you've aligned here, select the camera and then go Game Object, Align with View. And that will set the view of the camera to where you want it in the scene. Now grab the camera and attach it to Sporty Granny. So just drop it onto your model. Now wherever your model goes, your camera will follow. And you can see that it doesn't appear as though the model is moving, but it actually is. And you've seen that in the scene. Okay, so if we now press play and we're running along and we press the space bar, you'll notice that there's a bit of a lag going on there that we need to fix to make it a little bit more seamless. Okay, so the first thing to do for that is to go back to our animator and make sure that when we come back from our jumping to running, that we not have this exit time occurring. And the same thing when we're going from running to jumping, is that that exit time isn't going to be on. Right, so now when we run it and we're running along and we're jumping, you can see that that jumping animation is getting interrupted, which is something that you might not want because it doesn't keep it very fluid, does it? So although you may want to interrupt the jumping straight away, you don't want to interrupt coming back from there. So we can turn that back on, that has exit time, and run it. So we use the up arrow key and we're in our running. If we hit the space bar, watch what happens. It's going nicely into the jump, but then at the end of the jump, there's this sort of standing still momentarily. And if you watch what's happening over in the animator view, you can see that although we've got is running set to true, it's still flipping back up to that idle state. So it's going momentarily through idle and then back down to running, causing us that jittery sort of movement. So we need to then stop this from triggering back to here, and you'll notice there's no conditions on there. So let's add another boolean value for idle, and we'll call this is idle. And then we're going to add that to this transition here, going back from jump to happy. So we're not going to go back in that direction unless we're in the idle state. So when idle is true, we'll be allowed to go from the jump in place back to the happy idle. So at this point, we're not setting that at all. This will cause a few issues. So we're running, we press the space bar, we jump, and we go back into running again. Okay, there's a little bit of a lag between the two animations, which we can fix up in a moment, but we're not going back up into the happy idle, which is good. Now, if we stop running at this point and we hit space bar, we will jump, but notice that although we played the idle, that trigger thing didn't happen to cause us to go back to this state because is idle has not been set to true. That means you need to go into the code and correct the problem. So in here we've got set bool is running to true if we're moving around. If we are moving around, then we have to assume that we're not idle. So we need to set is idle at this point to false. And otherwise, if we aren't translating, then we must be idle, and we set that to true. So we're kind of setting is running and is idle to the opposites of each other in here. Okay, so we save that and go to granny and run, we should be able to jump and go back into idle, and we should be able to run and jump and go back into the running. Okay, so just to remove that little laggy stand thing that happens at the end from this transition to the other, you could use what's called a blend tree, but in this case we don't need one. So although if you just select this transition between jump and running and come back over to the inspector, we've got this has exit time ticked to ensure that the jump animation runs for the whole extent of it, so it doesn't just sort of stop and go straight back into run immediately and have a little bouncy jump. You can go into the settings of the transition and set the interruption source so that at the very end of the jump animation, which is its exit time, you can cause a little blend to occur between the jump and the next state. So if we select the next state as our interruption source, and then we run it again, we'll find that the little lag is now gone because it's a really nice blend of the next state and the jumping animation. Alright, so that's the end of this tutorial. I will do a tutorial that shows you how to use the blend states after this one, but in this case we don't need it. So if you find that you can use these settings here for the interruptions between the states, and it will do a little blend for you without going into the complexity of blend trees, then this is definitely the way to go. Alright, so I hope that helped you learn a bit about Mixamo and the Mechanim system in Unity. Of course, this is just the basics and there's just so much more to learn, and hopefully I'll get some time to put some more tutorials up. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you in the next tutorial.